My name is Seti. I'm a peer support specialist. I am at Culver City, and I am very excited to present this research that I've done. And like Billy said, if you have any questions, feel free to interject, say something, say, hey, what does this mean? Or explain this. I'm very interactive, and the presentation is very laissez-faire, meaning that it's just open to possibilities of ideas. So I'm going to share my screen and we can get started. Okay. Can everybody see screen? Okay, cool. Awesome. Move the muscles and the muscles retrain the brain. Exemplary health and wellness practices for rapidly changing environments. I'm David Seti Kargbo. I'm a peer support specialist at Culver City. So meet Seti. Seti is a New Jersey native, born September 9, 1993, experienced homelessness for a half decade and active addiction for a decade. Still an addict. I identify as still being an addict. My clean date is March 30th, 2022. I regularly attend and I'm committed to the principles in the textbooks implemented in self-help support groups, AA, NA, CMA, and CA. That's Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, Crystal Meth Anonymous, and Cocaine Anonymous. I'm very passionate about community service and social issues. In this presentation, I suggest that recovery requires present negligent support, most exemplified through the problem solution experiences self-help support groups obtain. Furthermore, the peer support phenomenon of inventive change is a considerable challenge to clinical solutions for health-related problems. So what does all of that mean? We're going to get into that, and I want to expand on this idea that I have had in my head about being a peer support specialist. So a health-related problem is homelessness, addiction, trauma, or disorder, to my definition. Do we ever stop moving? Consider the bridge between the future and the past. Is it now? No, it's psychological distance. And this picture I have here is a old book from, I believe, the 70s by a meditator, a Harvard graduate, Baba Ram Das, and he talked about existentialism a lot and being in the present. So I figured that that would be kind of the scope of practice for this presentation. I have started with a video on the visual system just to kind of open up to what kind of vibe I'm going for.
Seti, is there supposed to be audio?
Oh,
We're not getting it.
you're not getting the audio?
No, when you share your screen, you have to click, you have to check the little box in the lower left-hand corner that said that for the audio.
Okay, let me see. Let me go back to the share options. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. So when I share the screen, there's an option at the bottom, you're saying?
Yeah, in the lower left-hand corner, there's a little box that you have to check that said that for the audio.
I'm looking right now.
Do you see it?
Um, No, I don't see anything in the, I don't see anything in the lower left
Hold,
corner.
hold on, let me see.
Okay.
Yeah, there's an option that says share sound under options. You don't see that?
I see share screen. Oh yeah, share sound. Okay, I see it. Yeah, that's you right there. Okay, I'm so sorry. So I'm gonna start it back over. Sorry about that, guys. Can everybody see can you see the video?
Yes.
Cool.
They will focus light on the back of the eye. That's important because lining the back of the eye is the retina. There are about 130 million tiny cells in the retina that are sensitive to light. When these cells detect light, they turn it into electrical signals. Those signals eventually make their way through the optic nerve, which is like a cable connecting the retina to the brain. The retina helps create a rough image, but it sees the world upside down. It's your brain that turns what you see right side up. Also, when you look at an object, each eye gets a slightly different view of the world. The brain combines those views and makes them into one picture. The brain also adds a lot of details to your vision, so that you can see complex shapes, movement, depth, and a rainbow of colors.
So this video that I just brought out, super complicated stuff. It's nothing that you have to be worried about, like knowing past the idea that we, absorb this light, and there's a lot of things the brain has to do in order to kind of give us a process that is more concrete for our understanding. And some of those things is turning an image upside down. We actually see two different things because we have two eyes, and the eyes are kind of like, twins, but there's still two different images the brain has to compromise into one image. And that's kind of like a framework of where I'm going with the presentation. So that's just an introductory video. Um, so move the muscles and the muscles retrain the brain. That's an RI spot. RI is standing for Recovery International, which is a self-help support group that deals with a lot of mental issues that people have and problems. And a lot of their solution is in RI spots, which is a way to figure out that you're in a jam, like a problem, and you use a spot, and the spot can help to do some damage control so that you do not act out or do something out of the ordinary based on how you're feeling, the anxiety. Um, the mission of Recovery International is to use the cognitive behavioral peer-to-peer self-help training system developed by Abraham Lowe, medical doctor, to help individuals gain skills to lead more peaceful and productive lives. I had a really, really, really interesting time exploring the idea of this specific RI spot. There's actually a lot of RI spots if you want to look into that. So rapidly changing environments, that's the second part of my presentation. I go into nature versus nurture, an argument that people have had for centuries and centuries about what really makes a person who they are. Is it their genetics? Is it how they were born? Or is it the environment that they're around? So I like to think of it as both. There are always idiosyncrasies for people, which is kind of like their specific nature and how it makes them react to certain things. Jane E. Brody had a quote in the New York Times that said, genetics researchers now know that while an individual's DNA is essentially immutable, meaning that it's always going to be a full representation of them, a wide range of environmental factors can confer what are called epigenetic differences, meaning that if you go out into the world and you're surrounded by, let's say, people who like to eat oranges, you might end up really liking oranges and not knowing why, even though you're obviously surrounded by people. You might try to fight it, but it probably could end up happening. The inevitable relationship. The chicken or the egg debate, which came first, could be solved when considering the context of a third party, the encounter. So, not saying it is very possible, but if there were to be an evidence of what came first, maybe a fossil, that encounter is pretty much our proof. That's how we do things in the world today. We see a physical proof or an evidence, and we go off of that rather than imagining an idea. And I just have this little rock stone tablet to say, you know, this is what came first. It was actually the chicken or the egg, or however you like to think of it. So the argument that I make is that peer support is most effective when enabling people to acquire some support that is specific to a natural occurrence. Feedback loops, more science terms. It's all going to make sense in a moment, I promise. The initial peer-to-person relationship must find a balance between decision-making and receiving help to make decisions. So section one, I go into a lot of science terms, but I use a lot of videos too. It's called psychological distance. This is something that I was speaking with my dad about. He is an environmental scientist, and he deals with the challenges of deniers of climate change quite often. And these people who deny climate change are not necessarily seeing no evidence of climate change, but there's something that happens within them, which is called psychological distance, which is a psychology term for when something is far away from you, it's really harder to see it as a reality. For example, a lot of people may say, you know, climate change may be real, you know, global warming or whatnot, but that's going to happen 300 years from now. Maybe it's going to affect us. So it doesn't really matter to me what I do with my, you know, my energy. That's an example of psychological distance. Sometimes we see things as unimportant to us, and we can base our understanding around that because it's so far removed from us. And I would say that a peer like me uses their experience. A peer specialist is usually using experience that's happened kind of distance from us because of things like recovery, or, you know, time has passed, or we were able to find a solution for what was going on. You know, if it was a trauma or addiction, in my case, it is addiction, and I would have almost 2 years clean. And I would say that that time away from it has developed psychological distance, which can change the way I view, you know, active addiction. So the questions I pose here are: how far away am I from the problem? How close is the solution? Does my thinking inhibit action for better health? And I use a reference, the NCBI article on psychological distance, which is just an article that goes into the different ways it can be. I have an image here to kind of explain it from the way I think in my weird way. Imagine that you are a seed and you turn into a sunflower. Now, the process in between that, you're always in the present of that process. But when you look back and you remember that you were a seed or you were in a previous state, it's harder to become that seed because you've already developed into something else. That's kind of an idea of psychological distance. And I think that us as peers, disclosing our lived experiences of recovery in a way that maintains the focus on and is beneficial to the person engaging in services, that really depends on our distance and how we can use that to benefit others. Obviously, if I was in active addiction, being able to help somebody who is trying to recover from that would be far greater of a challenge.
Seti, you have a question in the chat.
For sure. Question from Donze Robinson. What is this idea, concept, or thing, nature versus nurture? And how does nature versus nurture tie into psychological distance and being a peer supporter, supporting peers like me? I'm glad that you asked that. This whole melting pot of a presentation is going to address the idea of nature versus nurture, because there is no real answer. It's based on our perception, and our perceptions are limited to, you know, our, you know, finite, imperfect selves. So I would say that psychological distance is just, it is a happenstance that is inevitable. And based on that inevitability, we can measure things out in our environment. You know, like if I drive a car every day and I get to my location, which is my job, then I'm not necessarily focused on what times the buses are coming, or you know how soon I have to leave in order to leave extra early to get to my work, because I know that I already have a set idea of how to get to work. So my environment is kind of fixed in that sense. But if I was to lose my car, right, then the psychological distance of being a pedestrian is it's no longer just me seeing pedestrians on the street and thinking nothing of it. I know that I'm going to become one. So like that's kind of like an idea. So like we kind of use these tools of, you know, how we think of ourselves and what's outside of us and what's around us. So it's like it's a really, really great question that I hope that I kind of opened the door on that a little bit. So here's kind of a definition of the psychological distance. It's how far away we feel from people, places, and things, in a nutshell. It can be linked to physical distance. It can also be linked to emotional distance, perhaps distance in terms of hierarchy, culture, or experience. There is a correlation between the psychological distance on one hand and the effectiveness of different forms of motivation. That's from Mike Clayton, from online PM courses. Now, I ask questions here. How have we developed psychological distance as peers? The first question, who experiences psychological distance? And that answer is everyone. From everybody, from the time you're born to the time you die, you have something going on in your present moment that's different than what the past and the future looks like to you. What constitutes psychological distance? Like kind of I said before, physical distance, emotions, a change of attitude, repetition patterns, time, symbols that represent. Oh, I have a question here. What does that quote mean that you just read? What quote is that? Let's see if I can go to that. I'm guessing you're talking about this quote right here, Donze? Okay. It can be linked to physical distance. It can also be linked to emotional distance, perhaps distance in terms of hierarchy, culture, experience. There's a correlation between the psychological distance on the one hand and the effectiveness of different forms of motivation. So one thing I would say is back to the car thing. If you were to think about your car as a gas guzzler, right? You drive a Hummer or something like that. It guzzles gas. It emits all this gas into the air, right? But it looks good. It's a good looking car. You want to drive it. You feel good driving. It's got a good boom and bass system, and you know people compliment you on it. If someone were to come up to you and say, you know, that thing's really bad for the environment, I'm sure you wouldn't be a completely you know, unaware of that statement that they made. They would say, oh, okay. You would probably say something like, yeah, I know, I'm thinking about trading it in, you know, probably something to just kind of like let them know that you are aware of, you know, things like that. You're aware of certain ideas. But based on your lifestyle or the way that you have acquired this car, let's say, you know, came into a bit of money, you have a psychological distance from the idea that someone's trying to say, we need to take a stand on gas guzzlers and we need to save the planet. Because currently there's so many people that drive a car that guzzles gas. It's almost like, what difference would it make if I were to change my car? So that's a psychological distance. It's like that you can see something as being beneficial, but sometimes the context around it can be so overwhelming that it makes no sense to really it makes no sense of a benefit, you know, almost like putting a pinch of salt in like, you know, a ton of water or something, expecting it to taste different. So that's kind of what it means. So the motivation to do something or act really depends on our psychological distance. for me, being an addict, I used to smoke meth on the streets of Hollywood. And I still travel about and see people actively engaging in using drugs. But I've been going to a lot of groups and have had sponsorship as well as focus on understanding how the drugs have affected my body. That has given me much psychological distance from those moments where I was doing anything to get high. It's almost like, although I remember what I was engaging in, I don't have the motivation to pursue that. I would consider that, the things that took place for that to happen is it developed a psychological distance from that. Does that answer your question at all? Okay. You can unmute if you want. It's totally up to you.
I guess I think I'm stuck on the terminology. And I don't want to be bothersome with it because I do a little research myself and I could always like later on in my lifetime, if I'm really interested in it, look it up just
Well,
to
I do have a over here is a quick article that I think this goes to an article. Yes. That kind of talks about the theory
I
level.
guess what I'm trying to ask is as a
Uh-huh.
peer supporter, whether I'm supporting a family member or a client or a consumer, it sounds like uh, my, I guess my psychological distance of time, space, the environment, and even the person that I'm interacting with in a peer-like setting, the effectiveness of there's a correlation. I think you said a correlation between the effectiveness of my motivation and the psychological distance is based on something. I think that's what you were trying to explain, but I think I got caught up in the language and missed everything. So I
No,
apologize.
you're exactly where I want everyone to be. Because the information is a bit overwhelming based on the terminologies, and I know that that's kind of what you're focusing on, the terms of it. But this is exactly what I'm going to get into. In fact, you're jumping ahead a bit. I want you to really like understand that me coming from a science standpoint, I'm trying to make it as simple as possible because the terms aren't really what's important here. It is the relationship between the peer and the person and how we have an experience that has happened. It has already happened, and we're using that in a present moment. That's really the whole thing. The terms behind it are just terms that you can always look up and so I'm trying to kind of like develop a point, but it's okay right now to be kind of up in the air. Like, what does this mean? Like, where is he going? Because I'm going somewhere with it. Okay. So
Can you give an example of it, like in
yeah,
your own personal, because that's relatable to everything that's in the presentation?
yeah. An example of psychological distance.
Psychological distance and the correlation between the effectiveness of motivation. That's what the
Yeah,
quote said.
yeah. So like I said, I was an addict on the streets. Now that I go to self-help support groups, I understand my condition of being an addict, but I'm not motivated to go out and use actively. That to me is psychological distance and motivation based on the psychological distance. Since I have some time away from using, but I also now have skills that I've acquired based on reading the textbooks, going to the meetings, talking to a sponsor who has more time clean than I do. I've been able to develop a distance from using drugs psychologically and it's also physically a distance and it's emotionally a distance. I know that I'm much happier being off of drugs that I know my family trusts me and they want me to succeed. They see that I can support myself. That's an emotional distance from, needing a drug to feel happy, you know? So I would say that my motivation and the psychological distance correlate that way. Is that kind of what you were asking? I can't hear you.
Yeah, yeah, and it makes sense now because when can you go back to that quote? Because I just want to see it
Yes.
and point out you cleared it up for me. And I'm gonna show you the part that you cleared up. Right there, you
Okay.
see where it says, okay,
Yeah.
right there. There is
Yeah.
a correlation between the psychological distance on the one hand and the effectiveness of different forms that were right there, forms of motivation. And so the way you just explained it, how your psychological distance, emotional, terms of hierarchy, culture, etc., when as it relates to your recovery journey and your active addiction lifestyle, etc. Now there's your mind is kind of on a whole nother level of motivation based on the past. You don't want to go back there. You lived it, and you're motivated by it towards wanting to you're motivated to change by the experiences that you're having in recovery, the way your family sees you now, working with a sponsor. So now there's some type of distance between where you was at, who you was, and where you are now, and who you're becoming to be.
Yes,
Is that
absolutely.
is that what it means right here, where it says there
Yes.
is a correlation between?
I go into it so much further in the presentation.
Okay, thank
So
you, thank you.
I would love to continue. Um, So what Donze is explaining is completely the layout of being a peer. And I really want to entertain the idea of what the peer needs to be successful and what the person being helped needs to be successful. And I think that these questions and ideas that Donze is bringing up is extremely important in figuring out exactly how we develop this, which I believe is completely up to the person. Um, So I do ask questions, a peer support specialist, experience, peers, distance, the same issues. Going through. So yeah, I think we kind of answered this question. What is the peer's psychological distance to these same issues they have gone through, and how can that motivate them to help others? And I think we went over that kind of like with my experience. I'm sure everyone has different experiences that has happened, and it is such a weird thing to think that we can use those experiences to help others, because at the time those experiences were destroying us. And I think that that's what makes the peer, the research on being a peer so profound. I think there's a lot to uncover. Um, so what I have here is Cal Mesa's certifying entity for Medi-Cal peer support specialists. This is kind of like a crack in the pavement for the peer evolution of services in the mental health field, in the medical field. And they break it down into the program of the certified peer workforce, which I was fortunate to have done with Share. And I completed the training course, and I'm planning on taking my Cal Mesa peer certification exam soon. And I think I was in a class with Don Zay, actually, if I am correct. And he opened up the door for a lot of ideas, because some of the ways he was thinking, I was also thinking. But one thing I really liked about this image is that this really focuses on strengthening the workforce. And that to me is important, because I don't think that there is a general consensus as to how a peer is supposed to practice. The same way as in a clinical setting, there is a nationwide consensus. These are certain practices, these are ethics, and I think that we're starting to evolve as peers, in that we're learning to come up with, sure, I don't know how to say it, but we're coming up with ways that are almost, proofs of how to improve our lives, honoring peerness, connecting peers, reducing stigma. Like right now, I think we're in the ground stages of peer support. So I do like this image. And I think this is a way for the peer support specialist to reduce burnout, especially when you're working with people and you're deciding, well, how do I take time for myself as a peer? How do I, how am I a peer, but at the same time, am I supposed to look at my position as lesser? Like, is there a hierarchy of what, medical support or mental health support is? Am I on a lower scale as an alternative to a clinician? And I think that these type of Cal Mesa's this entity is supposed to be an embodying idea of what a peer is supposed to do in the workplace. And so we can look at some of them. I already read some of them. Mutual empowerment, advocacy, cultivating trust, fortifying and diversifying the workforce, reducing stigma, professional recognition for peers, connecting peers, building healthy communities, honoring peers, improving lives. And this is all really, really important, I think, especially in a field where, we are almost looked at as we're not supposed to have, we're not supposed to think negatively of ourselves. We're not supposed to have problems because we're helping people. So I said Cal Mesa is closing gaps of psychological distance in the workplace, meaning that we're bringing everything closer together within our mind. There's less abstract forms of thinking of being a peer with things like Cal Mesa, with an immersive entity for, this thing's in the way, hold on. I can't read that. I don't like that, this is in the way. With an immersive entity for motivating factors. This decreases psychological distance, which is good for the employee. Now I have here that the greater the psychological distance, as I said before, the more effective are abstract forms of motivation. An example is Ra from ancient Egypt. Ra ruled in all parts of the created world, the sky, the earth, and the underworld. He was believed to have ruled as the first pharaoh of ancient Egypt. He was the god of the sun, order, kings, and the sky. Every night he traveled on a boat to the underworld, defeated the devil snake, and rose the sun up from the underworld to start the day again for the people of Egypt. This motivated them to worship. And I believe that this is a form of psychological distance that is great. A lot of things in the world we cannot explain, science and religion, and there are a lot of ways of understanding life that have things that are proven and things that are in question. And I believe that when we all consider death, nobody has an informed response to it because nobody dead has ever been in communication. And I think that the greatest psychological distance we have is in the form of death. We all die and we all have an idea of what death may mean to us. And I think that the abstract can be a way to construct, based on our experiences and our beliefs and our faith, how we think of it. Now, the closer the psychological distance, when the psychological distance is closer, you need to use a more real form of motivation. As a child, have you ever been so extremely hungry that you invent unconventional recipes from foods you previously had no interest in eating? I have. I've gone into my fridge and I've looked at things that I swore I would never eat, but when my mom was at work, my dad was at work, I'm at home alone, I don't have any money, I'm just a kid. I'm taking things and putting them together just to get a meal, And I think that that's a great form of psychological distance that, your own stomach is starting to turn. It's as close as it can get. And you need to do something in order to, at that point, survive, eat. And you find ways to make something out of your situation. So the questions I had before, how far away am I from the problem? How close is the solution? Does my thinking inhibit action for better health? I have a picture here that I like to, look at, and I think of it as a peer and someone being service. So what I say here, if one hand represents a peer specialist and the other hand represents a person receiving services from a peer, which hand is most likely to be the peer specialist? And I leave that question, to the eye of the beholder. I know that when I think of a peer specialist, I think of someone helping somebody in a lower place. I may say that the hand above is the peer specialist. And I would say the hand below is the person who needs, help being lifted up. Now, envision that in this same scenario, the peer specialist is conveying their personal setbacks. This is an example of psychological distance. So when I do think about the idea that I have gone through something negative and it's impacted my life in such a great way, I see that my hand could actually be the one on the bottom, trying to give somebody something that my dirt, I would say, my skeletons. And I think it's just an interesting way to look at the relationship between a peer and a person being serviced. Now I have this video to what I find is a really, really, really proper way of expressing the ideal of the peer specialist ability. So what you see here is a video of the courtship process of bald eagles. When they're courting, when an eagle has found its mate, the one that they want to mate with and be with and reproduce pretty much for life. I think they have a monogamous bonding. They do this dance in the sky called talon locking. They lock their talons and they twist them and they just kind of like fall toward the ground. And as close as they can get to the ground, they separate before they get hurt. And I believe that that's a really great representation of the peer relationship, the peer-to-person relationship. Simply because a lot of times we're challenged to go into our past, into our skeletons, and this may bring things up in a way that's completely new. Because not only are we looking back in our past, we're not taking the time to work on ourselves from that. We are using where we're at right there and allowing somebody to investigate that process we took, which can always lead to something new, whether it could be good, bad, or whatever. So I have a breakout that I know Billy is going to assist me with. And the question I wanted to ask is, what do you think is the more appropriate hand for the peer specialist? Top, bottom, or both? And I wanted to make this a 7-minute breakout. So let me see. Can we do that, Billy?
I'm doing it right now, Seti.
Awesome. Okay.
Hey, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Well, I'll ask it in the breakout.
Okay.
Seti, when you get an invitation to join the room 2, don't go, okay?
Okay. Thank you so much, Billy.
No problem, Seti.
Yeah, I was actually very nervous to present the information, but I think it's going okay. It's really sciencey, but I think that, um, I'm trying to make it more, does what I'm saying make any sense at all?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
I'm following you.
Okay.
I didn't mean to exit the room. Could you pop me another room invitation? I'm sorry.
Sure.
Same thing, it bounced me out as well.
Sorry, but the breakout room, the other person I was with, I think accidentally got dropped. So I just wanted to say I think both hands could be the peer specialist because they're both helping each other and they're both peers.
Okay. I like that response.
Thank you. I wasn't sure if I was supposed to share it here or I
No,
don't know.
it's fine. I just wanted to do a breakout rooms, get people to, interact, and the breakout room is the best way to do it,
No,
I believe.
it's a great idea.
Yeah, but no, I agree with your response. I think that the when I it was hard for me to kind of see how the peer could be both, but something that I was speaking to my dad about was that he originally said that the peer specialist should have the hand at the bottom, and the person at the top should be the person who needs the help the most, because it's like we're bringing them back down to earth. They're so high up in the sky, and they're so gone that that we just need to like bring them back down to reality. Being so anxious or so uppity and or whatever's conflicting them. I never thought of it that way.
Well, and I think as peer specialists, we're also the one that could be up in the sky at sometimes, and sometimes I think they help bring us back down to not bring us down. They help level us back out
That's
because
a good point.
sometimes we are going through stuff, and we were all either the top hand or the bottom hand at some point.
Mhm. I think we can close the room. Is it?
You want to close it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think, how much time do we have left?
Okay. If I close the rooms, they'll close in 60 seconds.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah. Welcome back to Move the Muscles, and the Muscles Retrain the Brain. So would anyone like to expand upon what they talked about? Yes, no, maybe so.
I would.
Okay.
Gail Solser, first peer advocate hired December 10th, 2007 at the San Pedro Mental Health Clinic. I'm still full-time with Los Angeles County Department of Mental Health assignments under Janice Hahn. I get from time to time to solve in our communities, building healthy relationships. And so this here, what do you think is the more appropriate hand for the peer specialist, comma, top, bottom, or both, question mark? Well, we have to have mutuality with any relationship, whether it's one-on-one, micro, macro, face to face, but especially importantly, self-love, self-care. If we're not bringing our very best to any relationship, and what does that entail? It means eating healthy. It means getting the required 8 to 9 hours of sleep each night. And that's for everyone and everybody. And most importantly, exercise. If we're not taking action, being proactive, and all and everything I get to do. And like I said to Don, which was a real pleasure, I might add, Mr. Donza Robinson here on board. You know, it's such an honor to be with all of you today. You know, I've been doing this job, this role for well over 20 years. I'm now well established, working and getting paid to represent all indigenous first property owners of the United States of America. And I'm getting, you know, to fly, you know, to around the world. I leave for the Philippines this November. So I'm an honored peer specialist first and foremost. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Wow. Awesome. Would
Yeah,
anyone
I'll
else like
try
to?
to answer the question. I would like to try to answer the question. And the question, I'm gonna answer the question based on what I learned as a peer support, as a based on what I learned in the peer support trainings. Um, when I see the two hands, one reaching, one grabbing, the reaching and the grabbing is mutual. The reacher is helping himself by helping the grabber, and the grabber is helping himself by reaching. So it's a mutual relationship in that kind of way where they're both helping each other. At times, there may be a hierarchy in the terms of the peer specialist being the mentor of sorts, a guider, a leader as it relates to recovery and wellness, but not a hierarchy in terms of boss, supervisor, position of authority, or anything of that nature. As a matter of fact, I can give an example of how me reaching down to help somebody has helped me as it relates to psychological distance. When I see that guy laying on the sidewalk today, as I'm driving my car or standing at the bus stop or going into a place of business, when I see that person laying on the sidewalk, that psychological distance of me being not in that place no more, but remembering what it was like being in that place motivates me in a way where it effectively motivates me to stay on the road of wellness, recovery, and action plan. And at times, depending on the situation, that psychological distance, that peer support specialist role reminds me, seeing that person reminds me to not think I'm better than, greater than, or unique in any kind of way. And I occasionally keep clothing in my car that I randomly give to people or just drop off at the midnight mission. And as my way of being a peer supporter indirectly, in one way or another. As a matter of fact, I got Christmas candy canes that I bought at a discount after Christmas that I got in the car. And sometimes when they ask me for change or something, I just give them a handful of peppermints as my way to be supportive, but not enabling by giving them money that they might go, do drugs with or whatever. So to answer the question, as the presenter presented it, I see the two hands. I see the two birds, the eagles. That was a beautiful little video, by the way. I see the peer. I see the hands helping each other. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah.
I wanted to ask Miss Gail, could she elaborate on what she meant when she said the question was mundane? Because that's what she said in the breakout.
No question is mundane. So, I do apologize for making that blunt, emotional. I reacted, and that's a problem when we do that. When I do that, being a reactionary instead of a responder. The difference is in responding, right? So allow me. Thank you for inferring to me with me, connecting with me right now. I appreciate it. I just lost my 12-year marriage husband. His body was found at the Harbor Lake in Harbor City 2 weeks ago. And it was suspicious because they found his body down there at the lake. Foul play. It's still under investigation. So please bear with me. And I don't know, other than it's important for me to bring my best self. And as far as mundane, again, I do apologize. No question is mundane. Everyone should be asking to investigate further. If I don't know something, it's my responsibility to investigate, in order to build that rapport. And the real highlight is to build healthy relationships, as I stated before. And thank you again. What an honor, Don.
Thank you so much. The contextual level theory of psychological distance. This is
going to be okay, Ms. Gail. I hope you're going to be okay with what you shared in your personal with your husband. I hate to hear that happened to you, and I hope you're going to be okay, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andre. I just wanted to wrap up. Yeah, I think we kind of get the picture of psychological distance here. The reason that I bring the question on board, and I would say that what Gail touched on is so important, especially in my short time being experienced with peer specialists. My ability to react will overwhelm my need to respond. And it's not a bad thing. It's really me knowing where the truth is at in the form of, what I bring to the table versus, what's happening with somebody that's being serviced, because I've been through things. I've been through it with people, usually homelessness or addiction, or being in a psychotic state, dealing with depression, bipolar, schizophrenia, and I know that certain things are always going to yield certain consequences. So it's almost obvious to me. I have this quote here that says, "In my journey through incarceration, hospitals, institutions, and sober living homes, the constant pursuit of different goals has invariably hindered me from taking any actions, even remotely connected to achieving those goals. However, when I was homeless on the streets, I found freedom in continuing to dream and dream." And what that means to me is that I would not get anything done. My happiness was in the stagnation of my health and my mind. And why that is, I don't know. I have a video here that I wanted us to look at, and we don't have too much time left, but I do have a disclaimer. It's there's suggested material in this video, that there's paraphernalia, there's homelessness that is suggestive of certain things that may make people uncomfortable. But I ask the question, is this really free?
Generate lush harmonies from a single track with Harmony Engine.
Shockingly, Philadelphia police continued their look the other way policy, but locals say that was only for the sale of drugs, not public consumption. What you see today has only been allowed for the past few years.
When I was young, they used to get high in abandoned houses. They used to hide from people to do this. They used to keep it more concealed. They used to be more, you know what I'm saying? But you know what they told me though? When I told them, like, what is y'all doing? Go in the abandoned houses and get high. Why y'all doing this shit out here? You know what they told me? They said, if I go in the abandoned house and get high and I OD, ain't nobody gonna find me. So they really feel comfortable getting high outside. So, because when they OD, somebody walk past, somebody see them, and they give them CPR. And I gave them CPR plenty of times, and gave them Narcan plenty of times. But like back in the day, like I said, they used to go in the abandoned house. They used to hide from this. This always been a problem. It's just now it's outside for everybody to see now.
So in terms of legality, is it legal to use and sell drugs in this particular radius?
If you don't get locked up, what you call it? Say if a cop walk past you, right, and you getting high outside, and you don't get locked up, or you get no citations, no nothing, what you call it? It's legal, almost.
Legal. But what about actually selling drugs? That's still illegal, right?
It's definitely still illegal. Definitely can't sell drugs. Definitely can't sell drugs, yeah.
This is a very important distinction to make. While in recent years, Philadelphia police have turned an extreme blind eye to public drug consumption in Kensington, the same does not apply to drug dealing, like it once did during the days of the Irish mob.
A major drug bust in Kensington. This morning, Philadelphia District Attorney Larry Krasner announced
So this video touches upon the idea of what the image looks like. And I've spoken to a lot of people about why they think it is acceptable or turning a blind eye to people using in the streets like Skid Row or Kensington in Philadelphia. I'm from the East Coast, and that's the area around where I grew up. Versus selling drugs, where you would definitely get nabbed by a police officer. And a lot of times the conversation that I'm hearing, the discourse, is that if you stop the drug dealer, then you stop the drugs from being distributed. Well, in my experience, I felt as though that completely takes away the advocacy of the person who needs help. So the brain will associate far away from abstract, big picture, and vague, and we associate closer with concrete, real, and detailed. In social psychology, a construal is a way that people perceive, comprehend, and interpret their world. In reality, the different distance dimensions are separable. The fact that something happened long ago doesn't necessarily mean it took place far away, that it occurred to a stranger, or that it's improbable. Nevertheless, as the research reviewed here demonstrates, there's a marked commonality in the way people respond to different distance dimensions. Construal level theory proposes that the commonality stems from the fact that responding to an event that is increasingly distant on any of these dimensions requires relying on more mental construal and less on direct experience of the event. Now, what the heck does all that mean? What it's trying to say here that applies to the peer is that since we are more removed from these experiences that we're using in order to help others, and that removal is based on, that we're not going through the adverse effects of whatever it is we're experiencing, trauma, addiction. The further we are away from that, we rely on our brains more and our mental construal more in order to create a picture of this event, create an idea. And this is what generally makes burnout. When you're dealing with people who are going through something you went through, it's very easy to say, I've been through this. Like we call somebody at a self-help group an old timer. They have 30 years without drinking a sip of alcohol. And they go, I know this is what happened to me. And it's like their idea of that experience gets wilder and wilder each time. Like You know, like I swear I hear people saying, I jumped out of a plane butt naked and there was a beer in my hand. And it's like, I understand that the further away we are from things, the more abstract the idea is. So when dealing with someone who's in a current situation, the peer has to use more of their brain, more of their mind in order to create an understanding of that reality. Simply because we went through it. There's no way around it. We can't say that what they're doing is wrong. We can't say that what they're doing doesn't make sense. We can't say that it's an abomination, an abstracity, because we did the same thing in a lot of cases. So we have to create this abstract. So wrapping up section 1, psychological distance, it will show up later. It's a great term. Look it up, find it on Google. Now, in these next couple sections, things get scientific and very complex, but bear with me. The world of peer support takes some creativity. The basic idea is that there needs to be a healthy balance between those we support and our own support. That best happens with, I leave that blank. I still do, and that's my way of thinking about it. This creates a huge oxymoron, almost like a paradox. Why would a peer support specialist need support? I look at science terms, rods and cones, positive feedback loops, and negative feedback loops. I'm a scientist just by education, not by profession, and not by anyone's advice. These draw a connection between our thoughts and our actions. We sometimes can't control our thoughts and our actions. Hopefully, they produce good outcomes. Feedback loops. This picture is very simple to follow. It is a seed that turns into a tree that bears fruit. And it's a cycle because the fruit has a seed in it that eventually can turn into another tree. Why nothing seems perfect? In a continuum of space and time, all of life continues to evolve. But forces collide and cause conflict. What would that mean for a seed? Let's say this diagram to the left is a successful life cycle. A seed grows into a tree and bears apples. The seeds in the apple reach soil and the cycle starts over. This is an appealing circumstance in recovery, a stable process that procures a purpose for life. All of these things in the diagram have the purpose in order to continue growth and reproduce and bear fruit. This process doesn't happen alone. There needs to be support all the way through. Water, light, and soil and nutrients guide this process. That's a positive feedback loop. The positive feedback loop supports the seed with the absorption of light. The nutrients get intake into the soil, into the seed, and it sprouts. And the water until it's a fully sprouted organic tree producing fruits. What a great thing. However, this causes negative feedback. The nutrients eventually become used up. The tree is too big. There's a lot of fruit, and the time it takes for the soil to replenish the nutrients is not faster than the tree's growth. So the tree receives a signal, leaving less growth rates, fewer leaves, and fewer fruit. We don't want a world full of apple trees. If apple trees were just the dominating force of life and they were allowed to grow to their own greed and fruition, we would be a world full of them. There would be nothing else. All in all, this is good. So there's a signal that goes on. It's pretty much the tree is great. It's doing everything it's supposed to be doing. But there's a signal in nature that says, hey, we're going to maybe turn these certain chemicals into these different chemicals. We're going to stop your growth. We're not going to allow you to do this any further. And that's something that the tree has already been evolved to understand. It's doing too much. It's too much of a good thing. Because all in all, it's a cycle. There's no destination really for a seed turning into a tree and bearing fruit. You know, people eat the fruit, the seeds, people might use the tree, you know, for whatever reason. And everything recycles. I see there is a raised hand. Dante.
About that. This cycle is in relation to the peer support specialist role and the plant life cycle. Wait a minute. Okay, so I think I understand this to mean that the peer receives the help, that's the seed, and is nurtured into a tree by the support from their community, and then they in turn produce the fruits of wellness, recovery, etc. But in order for them to continue to bear the fruits of that, they in turn have to plant the seed. Is that what this diagram is in relation to?
You are absolutely right. That's exactly what's going on here.
Okay, I got one other question.
Yes.
Because it's a two-part question. When you go back to that previous slide before you went to this one, right quick.
Okay.
There was there was another picture.
Another picture, right?
That right there. That right there. Yeah. So this is all leading up to that diagram. Okay, I get it. It
Yes,
said the basic
I have quite a few more slides I'm trying to get through.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No, it's all good.
Thank you.
But yes, this cycle, where I'm going with this, adapting to change, right? Donze pointed out this could be the peer growing and producing fruits of their growth, which is great. The idea of this signal that I'm saying, it leaves less growth rates, fewer leaves. They say that the newcomer is the most important person at a self-help meeting, for the reason being that the newcomer needs to be stimulated so that way they can start on their recovery. It's not like the person who has time is less important. That's just a way we say things so that the newcomer can feel more engaged and see that it is necessary we have them contribute to society, being a functioning person who is not struggling or problematic. So this signal is almost like saying, you know what, things are going well. You know, it's almost like a parent that raises a child and does everything for the child, and eventually the child becomes independent. That's kind of like what this signal is like. And that's a feedback. It's like saying, you know, we've been monitoring you, you know, hey, you've been doing such a great job. Here's a promotion or something like that. Or maybe you could try moving to this department and, you know, you go there and then you excel incredibly, you know, become a millionaire or something. I don't know. But the idea of the feedback loop is that we are not meant in nature to continue along the same path forever, even if it's a good path. And that's an extremely important thing to remember as a peer and a peer specialist. That the interpretation of that could be infinite. So when I say adapting to change, I say a positive feedback loop is usually a bad thing in nature. There's overstimulation, exasperation of resources, and resistance to change from outside sources. So the positive feedback loop is necessary, but it eventually, and the end result of the positive feedback loop is bad because it doesn't maintain balance. The negative feedback loop is usually good in nature because there's moderation of the growth, there's replenishing of resources and natural balance in the environment. So that way everything doesn't become a self-fulfilling prophecy of, you know, this is, you know, divine intervention. And, you know, one of the interesting things I was talking about with my folks was the story of Prince Harry and how the royal family and their position in government today versus back then, and the idea of focusing on a person's bloodline to be a determining factor of ruling a world or ruling a nation versus rules and laws. So it's like we've adapted to a process where we can kind of use negative feedback in order to help the overall cause. And I think that's Donze kind of already did this, but I was going to have a question of, can you describe a positive and feedback loop for a peer specialist? And Donze kind of put that into a perspective. So for sake of time, I'm going to continue, but definitely, Amanda Evans, for sure. Do you have something you want to add?
I do actually have something I want to add, that a lot of times, so history repeats itself, and by history books, it's teaching us what mistakes they made so we don't make the same mistakes, or at least educate us on how they got through it. It's almost like what we're doing. It's It's the same thing that we've been doing for hundreds of years, in my opinion. And that was my positive feedback about how we're trying to break that cycle and share how our history it was, and so other people don't repeat it.
Yeah, for sure. I agree with that completely, you know, and I think that you don't want history to repeat itself, but there's still like kind of a thing where we don't tell the person what not to do. You know what I mean? Like they might be saying, hey, you know, I'm spending all my money at the casino, but I'm not drinking anymore. And I don't want to be the person that's like, hey, don't do that. That's going to cause you to drink, or you're going to lose all your money. It's like, I can only provide, you know, I can only provide my experience because that may inspire them. So like I like to think of peer peer work as inventive change. It's almost like there is no right or wrong answer at all. There's just a way to invent this kind of stimulation that can bring about a positive, you know, reinforcement. So like wrapping up section 2, positive and negative feedback loops. Billy, how much time do I have left?
Like 1 minute.
Okay. So I had a lot more to say but I think where we're at is perfectly fine for this presentation, because I think that there's a lot of like discourse where I'm at in my peer specialist career is really in the ground stages. I'm still exploring so many ideas. So some of these ideas I would love to share, but I think that for now it's just the basic, and it is mundanity at the end of the day, the basic ideas of how to help people. You know, it's very obvious that we can help others, others help us. It's the helper therapy principle, where the person that we may be paid to do a certain service, but we are also receiving help that can help other people. It's like a who's helping who thing. And me exploring that, I've come to so many different like roadblocks, just thinking that there's a one-all solution, that I just wanted to present, you know, this research is kind of like looking at different terms that are used in different worlds of thought, like science or nature, just to pose kind of the overall implementation of how the peer is going to evolve, especially in the States. And that goes back for me to the Cal Mesa slide, if I can go back to that. Because I think it's important that we have kind of a consensus on peer etiquette. Not saying that peers are unethical. So, you know, I would just like to wrap up by thanking everyone for participating. That's pretty much my presentation.
Thank you, Seti. So I wanted to encourage everyone to fill out the evaluation, the presenter evaluation. I shared the link in the chat. There's also the same link will take you to a place where you can request a certificate of attendance. Okay. I'd like to thank Seti for his presentation and all of you for attending. Okay. Have a good day.
Thank you so much, Billy.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a great presentation, and I really like the science based on it, and I would love to have heard more. I really liked it.
Yeah, I realized I was really afraid I wasn't going to be able to do all of it, so I wanted to entertain questions to make the time spread, but I realized I have actually a lot of information. I should have waited till the end for questions, but it's all good.
You might want to pat yourself on the back for that one, because I liked it too.
Oh, thank you, Donze.
You did. You knew what you knew. I'll put it like this. You was able to elaborate and explain all the different questions that I had, because I tend to get caught up in terminology, and I ask questions in the hopes that the presenter, instructor, or whoever could break it down in a layman's term, which will help me to be clear on the terminology itself, and then I become, and when they're able to do that, it allows me to be more interested, because my general question that's basically tied into the terminology was interesting in itself. When I hear the word psychological distance, I was like, wow, okay, damn, what is that? Oh shit, I want to know more about that. And so now it's embedded in my mind because you elaborated on it. You didn't just like blow past it. You know what I mean? As a question that was irrelevant, or as a question that was, you didn't make me feel like my question was, you didn't appear to make me feel like my question was bothersome or elementary. You in fact made an effort to engage as a presenter. You made an effort to elaborate as a presenter. You was able to continue to stay focused on what you presented, even though there was a back and forth, a dialogue, or a sidebar interruption of sorts with my question. You continue to, kind of be motivated off of that.
I would say absolutely no interruption. Absolutely no interruption. In fact, I'm glad. I take it back. I'm glad I did have questions, because I know that if I were to just present information with no discourse on it, it would be extremely overwhelming. It was overwhelming for me to compile this information.
Well, like I said, man, that distance, psychological distance. Yeah, I took a bunch of psychology courses. I hadn't heard that yet. So I locked right into it. So now I wouldn't be surprised to find myself at 3 a.m. or whenever looking up further research and elaborating on it, and it made sense after a while. I said, "Damn, wait a minute." I had my psychological distance between me and my neighbor as relates to the peer support role, because I always find myself in somewhere or another in a supporting peer kind of role within my immediate community. For example, when I see him looking disheveled, it reminds me of how I used to be and how I don't want to go back to that. And it affects my level of motivation to keep going forward in life. And at the same time, I always end up saying to him, in the best way I could say it, hey, do you need a pair of socks?
Yeah.
Or I won't even say that. I'll just keep it in mind that I saw that. And then I'll say to myself, but being supportive, wow, these socks in the drawer, I think Dorsey might want these.
Seti, we need to clear the room for the next presentation.
Awesome.
Oh,
all
okay.
right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Billy. All right, Donze.